The girl's heart was pounding so hard that it almost drowned out the soft music playing inside the elegant restaurant. She stood outside for a few seconds longer than necessary, staring at the golden lights twinkling across the glass doors. Her reflection looked strange to her. She had never worn such a dress before, one that shimmered faintly under the street lamps. It wasn't hers, of course. Nothing about tonight was hers. The dress, the high heels that pinched her feet, even the perfume clinging faintly to her wrists, all borrowed from her older sister, who had insisted she go in her place. "It's just dinner," her sister had said carelessly, slipping lipstick across her lips. "He'll never notice the difference. You'll thank me later." But now, standing here, she felt like a thief about to be caught. She took a deep breath and pushed the doors open. The atmosphere inside was worlds apart from the life she knew. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, waiters glided silently with silver trays, and the low murmur of voices carried an effortless sophistication. She wanted to turn back immediately, but her feet betrayed her, carrying her forward with hesitant steps. She clutched her old, worn-out purse tightly, the only piece of herself she hadn't been able to hide, and prayed no one would notice how out of place she was. Her eyes scanned the room nervously until they fell on him. Seated at a table near the window, he looked like he belonged in one of those glossy magazines she sometimes flipped through at the bookstore. His sharp suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair swept back with precision, his presence commanding even while he simply sipped from a glass of water. The world seemed to tilt for a moment. She froze in place, breath caught in her throat, because there was no mistaking it, this man was not ordinary. This man was dangerous, powerful, and impossibly untouchable. She considered fleeing right then, retreating back into the shadows before he even saw her. What would she say if he asked her about her family, her job, her world? Lies could only stretch so far before they broke. But before she could decide, his gaze lifted. Dark, piercing eyes locked onto hers across the room, sharp as if they saw right through her shaky disguise. Her heart stuttered violently, and the heat rose to her cheeks. With trembling steps, she forced herself to move closer. Each click of her borrowed heels echoed too loudly, like accusations. When she reached the table, she gave a small, nervous smile, unsure if her lips were even working. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He just watched her in silence, his expression unreadable, and she felt her knees weaken under the weight of his presence. "Sit," he finally said, his voice smooth, deep, and commanding. The single word made her chest tighten. She lowered herself into the chair opposite him, her hands twisting in her lap beneath the tablecloth. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't the girl he was expecting. But fate, it seemed, had pulled her straight into the lion's den, and there was no turning back. He studied her with a gaze that felt like fire and ice at the same time. His eyes were too sharp, too steady, as though he had already guessed she was not who she claimed to be. She shifted in her seat, lowering her eyes to the menu in front of her, though the letters blurred together. Her fingers trembled as she tried to steady them on the edge of the table. She could feel her heart hammering inside her chest, the sound so loud she was sure he must hear it too. The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating, until she found herself blurting out in a small voice, I think there's been a mistake. I shouldn't be here." She made the words tumble out quickly, almost hoping that once spoken, they would free her from this charade. She imagined his brows furrowing in anger, imagined him calling the waiter and dismissing her, imagined herself running back to her tiny apartment and forgetting this night ever happened. But instead of anger, his lips curved into something that looked suspiciously like amusement. He leaned back slightly, folding his arms as though enjoying a private joke. "A mistake," he repeated slowly, his deep voice echoing across the table. "That's interesting. Most women would be begging for the chance to sit where you're sitting." Her throat went dry. His tone wasn't arrogant, not entirely, it was simply a statement of fact, the kind of truth spoken by a man who was used to power, to admiration, to people bending over backward to please him. She felt smaller by the second, trapped under his gaze. She forced herself to meet his eyes, if only for a moment. "I'm not like most women," she whispered, her voice uneven, betraying her nerves. She wanted him to believe it, because it was true. She had no business being here, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Something flickered in his expression at her words, a spark of intrigue that softened the steel in his eyes. He leaned forward now, his arms resting on the table, his voice lower, more deliberate. "Good," he said simply. "Then stay. I want to know you." The words stunned her, stealing her breath. She blinked at him, her lips parting as if to protest, but no sound came out. Why would a man like him, wealthy, commanding, powerful, want to know someone like her? She was nobody. A girl who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, who patched her clothes until the fabric could hold no more, who had nothing to offer but her honesty and her worn-out dreams. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "You don't understand. I shouldn't." He cut her off with a subtle lift of his hand, his expression unreadable now. "You're already here," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "So don't waste my time with excuses. Just be yourself." The demand felt impossible. Be herself. How could she, when the real her was the very thing she wanted to hide? Yet beneath his authority, there was something else, an odd patience, an unspoken assurance that he wasn't mocking her. That perhaps, for once, someone actually wanted to listen. And as the waiter approached with a bottle of wine, she realized she had no choice. The trap had closed around her, but strangely, it wasn't fear that pressed against her chest now. It was something far more dangerous. Curiosity. The meal progressed more slowly than she expected. At first, she answered his questions with hesitation, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid that if she revealed too much he would see the truth, that she wasn't the glamorous, polished woman he had been promised, but only the substitute. Yet the more he spoke, the more his presence disarmed her. He didn't fill the silence with meaningless chatter like most men she had encountered at her part-time jobs. Instead, he listened. Every time her words faltered, his dark gaze remained fixed on her, calm and unwavering, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for her to speak. She found herself telling him small pieces of her reality, pieces she had never intended to reveal. How she worked double shifts at a cafe, how she took sewing jobs in the evenings to pay the rent, how she had younger siblings at home who depended on her. She spoke softly, almost ashamed, expecting at any moment for him to smirk or dismiss her. But instead, he leaned closer, elbows resting on the table, as if each word mattered. The intensity of his attention both unsettled and warmed her. No one had ever looked at her like this before. Halfway through the meal, the sudden sound of a child's giggle shattered the quiet elegance of the restaurant. She turned, startled, just in time to see a little girl in a frilly dress darting between the tables. The girl had escaped from a distracted nanny, her curls bouncing as she ran. Before the waitstaff could intervene, the child flung herself at the man across from her. "Daddy!" She squealed with delight, wrapping tiny arms around his leg. The girl's breath caught in her throat. So this was the truth. Not only was he a CEO, not only was he powerful and untouchable, he was also a father. The man's stern expression softened instantly as he looked down at his daughter, his eyes warming in a way she hadn't seen before. But when he tried to hush the child, embarrassed by the disruption, she noticed the little girl's lower lip tremble, tears welling up in her big eyes. Something inside her stirred, an instinct she couldn't fight. Without thinking, she slipped from her chair and knelt on the polished floor beside the child. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice warm and soothing. "No tears, okay? Your daddy's right here, and he loves you very much." The little girl blinked at her, startled, then slowly relaxed as she reached out a small hand. She held it carefully, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face with tenderness. The child giggled again, calmer now, and leaned into her embrace as though she had always known her. When she finally glanced up, she found the CEO watching her in silence. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were different now, less guarded, more searching. There was something raw in his gaze, something almost vulnerable, as though he was seeing her for the first time, not as an imposter, not as a mistake, but as someone who had slipped past the walls he had built around himself and his daughter. For the first time that evening, she forgot about the dress, the lies, the pretense. She was simply herself, gentle, protective, real. And in that moment, she sensed he wasn't letting her go anywhere. When the plates were cleared and the candles on the table had burned lower, she rose from her seat, clutching her purse as though it might shield her from the weight of everything that had just happened. She could still feel the warmth of the little girl's hand in hers, the innocent trust in those big eyes, and it shook her more than she wanted to admit. She wasn't supposed to cross into their world. She wasn't supposed to care. This had been her sister's blind date, not hers. She had only been a stand-in, a shadow. Nothing more. Her voice trembled as she said, "Thank you for dinner. I'll go now." She meant it sincerely, and yet every syllable felt like a lie, because walking away felt harder than it should have. She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, a firm hand closed gently around her wrist. The touch wasn't harsh, but it carried authority, the kind that left no room for argument. She froze, staring down at the elegant fingers wrapped around her arm, and then slowly lifted her gaze to his face. His eyes were fixed on her, dark and unyielding, but behind the intensity was something that caught her off guard. Vulnerability, as if he was afraid of losing something he hadn't even had yet. His voice, low and steady, filled the space between them. "Don't," he said. "Don't walk away." Her breath caught. She shook her head, forcing a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't understand. I was never supposed to be here. My sister." "I know," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "From the moment you walked in, I knew you weren't the woman I was promised. But I don't care. She isn't the one who made me stop and listen. You are." The honesty in his words struck her like a physical blow. She wanted to protest again, to remind him that she had nothing, no fortune, no glamour, nothing to offer a man like him. But the sincerity in his gaze left her silent. Her throat ached with words she couldn't bring herself to say. The little girl peeked out from behind her father's chair then, rubbing her eyes sleepily, her tiny voice piping up. "Daddy, can she stay?" The question was innocent, but it landed with the force of destiny. Her chest tightened painfully. How could she explain to this child that she didn't belong, that she was just a poor girl pretending for one night? And yet, in the child's hopeful eyes, she saw something she couldn't turn away from. The CEO stepped closer, his grip on her wrist softening into something almost tender. His expression softened too, though his tone remained resolute. "You think you don't belong here," he said, "but you do. Maybe more than anyone ever has." She stood frozen, her heart pounding as she searched his face for any sign of insincerity, but found none. Instead, she saw conviction, strength, and a strange kind of longing that mirrored her own. It terrified her, but it also pulled her in like gravity, unstoppable and inevitable. For a moment, the world around them faded, the glittering lights, the hushed voices, the clinking glasses. There was only the man before her, the warmth of his hand, the innocent trust of his daughter, and the dawning realization that fate had placed her here for a reason. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And maybe she didn't need them. The look in his eyes said enough. He wasn't going to let her walk away. Not tonight. Maybe not ever.